Okay, so today we're going to talk about what is perhaps one of the worst things affecting people's mental health these days. That being the news and social media. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, news these days is always terrible and full of bad, depressing news. If you consume the news, all you'll hear about is war and death and basically everything else that's terrible in the world. So as you can imagine, people are stressed out and suffering quite severely as a result of this. And frankly, this is an issue that not nearly enough people are aware of, since for whatever reason, mental health isn't considered nearly as important as physical health. So in today's video, I want to talk a little bit about how the news and social media are terrible for your mental health, and maybe, with any luck, talk you out of consuming the news at all. So first, I do just want to preface this video by saying that I'm not totally against the news. The news is a great way to stay informed, and I'm sure that in many ways it probably benefits the public and probably has numerous benefits. In fact, I think that light-hearted news is absolutely fantastic. For instance, technology news, sporting news, and whatever else you might be interested in is great. What I have a problem with when it comes to the news are the ways in which it operates and the negative effects that it has on people. You see, whether you're aware of it or not, the news really stresses you out and can cause you some pretty significant mental health problems. The reason for that is that when you consume the news, your fight or flight response is actually triggered. It seems that our brains aren't capable of distinguishing between real danger and a simple news report. So as far as your brain is concerned, you're actually in real danger when you read the news. The news is very literally poison. Reading the news causes a release of cortisol. This deregulates the immune system and inhibits the release of growth hormones. This causes impaired digestion, lack of growth of the cells, hair and bones, and increased susceptibility to infection. Additionally, it could also cause fear, aggression, tunnel vision, and desensitization. The news could not be any more literally a poison, both mentally and physically. So you might ask, if the news as it exists today is so bad for you, why exactly does the news continue to report on such stressful subjects? Put simply, it's good for their bottom line. Good news stories just don't sell or drive engagement. Bad news stories keep people hooked and garner clicks. So it's pretty easy to see why news sites only tend to report on bad news. Even public news services seem to only report bad news, possibly to compete with private news sources. So now we've established that the news is terrible, let's talk a little more about why it's bad for you. First, as we've already mentioned, it's terrible for your mental health. That should be enough to stop you from engaging with the news as is, but just in case it's not, here are some other reasons why the news is bad for you. The first of those reasons is that the news is addictive. The more you read, the more you want to read. As it ends up, humans are actually really good at doing things that are bad for us. We crave that cortisol that's released when we read bad news. This craving has given rise to what's actually called doom scrolling. People will literally sit down and read bad news because it's become an addiction to them, which is an unbelievably self-destructive behaviour. Another reason why the news is addictive is that our brains crave having a complete picture. This is how news sources gather repeat viewers. Once we read one news story, we want to read more stories on the same subject in order to create a more complete picture in our head. In our brains, we like to create stories about things. Of course, news sources know this and they exploit it. It's a pretty endless process too, since it's very rare that real life has a neat conclusion, so we're stuck reading news stories until the end of time pretty much. Our brains really do want that traditional narrative structure in real life, a beginning, a middle and an end. Another problem with the news is that it actually discourages you from genuinely understanding a subject. People tend to pick a news source and unquestioningly believe everything that they hear from it without doing their own research. This is why you often see people echoing conspiracy theories or biases that they've read in the news. Or in other words, reading the news actually makes you dumber. Frankly, the news was never really designed to give people a nuanced understanding of a subject. Before the internet, the goal of news was to give a punchy headline that would sell papers. Now that the internet is so widespread, the issue is even worse. Most people don't even read news articles. They just glance at a title and go on with their day. How could you possibly hope to understand something in less than 10 words? I'm sure there's even an example of this problem here in this very video. I'm sure a lot of people have probably made up their minds about this video without having watched all or even most of it. Not only is the news bad for you, but it's actually also completely irrelevant too. Think about it. When was the last time that you actually learnt something valuable from the news? Most of the time, you won't even remember the news stories that you hear about, which really makes the whole endeavour quite pointless. The only thing that news is good for is making small talk with people that you'd rather not be talking with, which is a completely avoidable situation. So now you might be asking, how can I repair the damage done by consuming the news? Well, the simplest answer is that you need to touch grass. No, really. If you actually go outside and engage with people, you'll realise that the world isn't nearly as bad as the news or social media would have you believe. Sure, there are important issues that actually affect people that you do need to understand, but I'd argue that you'll get a better understanding of these issues if you educate yourself outside of the news. Plus, if you're reading the news or scrolling through social media, you're not really making a difference. If you want to make a difference, go volunteer, educate someone, protest, or really anything else with the time that you'd usually spend doom scrolling or consuming the news or whatever else. Additionally, if you stop consuming the news, you'll probably have a better, less biased view of the world. Whether you like it or not, the news does instill various biases, prejudices, and assumptions in us. Those crazy people who are always ranting about how bad immigrants or trans people or whatever else are, yeah, those people definitely read the tabloids too much. Don't be like those people. Don't consume the news. If you want to actually understand a subject, I'd probably recommend reading a book. Books aren't usually made to generate clicks, and generally take a more timeless approach to a subject. That, and the people that write them usually actually understand the subject, which is far more than can be said for the news most of the time. So, I mentioned social media at the start of this video, so you might wonder where it comes in, since I haven't really mentioned it yet. Well, a lot of what I just said about the news also applies to social media, but additionally, social media, as well as being generally an awful place, kind of acts as the news part 2. Let me explain. People take the terrible things that they've heard in the news and regurgitate it within these rather insular communities of people who are constantly catastrophizing, which is obviously extremely unhealthy. Don't be part of those communities, it only leads to suffering for you. So in conclusion, as harsh as it sounds, stop reading the news and go outside. Your mental health will absolutely thank you. But with that said, those are my thoughts. What do you think of them? Let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.